had a little piece of pizza. And I just want to tell you guys that it's just been so long video.
And they use all of this abundant energy to get rid of salt in the water, so now the crew has like drinking water and can take showers while they're floating hundreds of meters under the ocean. Like, this is becoming really insane. The nuclear reactor solved all the problems. Remember how diesel submarines had to refuel all the time and they had to come up to the surface to run their engines and get rid of their exhaust and suck in the air? Nuclear submarines could now run underwater without needing to refuel for 20 years. Oh, that is if you don't count having to refuel the humans on board. So yeah. Rickover was right. Nuclear reactors on submarines changed everything. They are now way more useful. You can now sneak around the ocean and never give away your position. Okay, so now that we can be underwater for basically ever, let's load these suckers up with big weapons. These suckers are getting huge by like the 70s and 80s. I mean, here was the German U-boat. Remember the one, like the thing that like really like pushed it all forward? And here is an American Cold War era submarine, the Ohio class.
Oh,
this thing is massive. Like, zoom in here. Those are people. Here's their kitchen. Here's the reactor back here doing all of its magic. And look, here's where the crew sleeps. Oh, and what are they sleeping next to? What are all these tubes doing here? Oh, these tubes, kind of right where the crew is sleeping. Yeah, these tubes are what make the submarine maybe the most important weapon to have ever existed. This is where the nukes are. Well, technically, we don't know that this is where the nukes are, and any submariner will vehemently tell you that, quote, we cannot confirm or deny whether or not the missiles inside of these silos carry nuclear weapons. Wink, wink. This is where the nukes are. So, what started as two superpowers nerding out about German submarine tech in the 40s turned into an arms race that resulted in both of them figuring out how to power their subs with nuclear reactors and the ability to load up these subs with 24 rockets that they could launch to the edge of space at any moment carrying multiple nuclear warheads. Like, having nuclear weapons on land ready to fire is pretty cool. Having them on planes is pretty powerful, but you can see both of those things. When you have a sub quietly roving around the world's oceans with the ability to carry a bunch of nuclear weapons and to launch them at any point, you've just achieved the most powerful advantage in military strategy. Surprise. The panopticon. Your enemy has no idea where you are, but they know you are somewhere, in range at all times, so they have to act as if you are everywhere, a few button presses away from launching one of these things. But this psychological sort of mind game only works if you are never noticed. So the next phase of this technological evolution of submarines focuses on silence. They start coating their submarines with rubber tiles so that the sonar doesn't bounce off as well. They took these giant propellers that, yes, are massive, bigger than you can imagine, and made them impossibly quiet. And even on the inside, they started taking crazy precautions. Like, all the heavy gear in a submarine is mounted on rubber pads to dampen any vibration that could be detected or heard. The cooks even started putting rubber on everything, like their mixing bowls and their mixing spatulas are all like sound deadening materials so that they don't send out vibration and make noise. The submarine force is serious about silence. In fact, they take pride in calling themselves the Silent Service. And there's kind of a chip on their shoulder because they don't get nearly as much recognition as like these guys do. They're just like lurking in the depths of the ocean doing like a really important defense thing, and no one knows about them because literally that's their job, is to never be noticed. Wow. So you have the US and the Soviet Union, both with the ability to launch nukes from their submarines. And ironically, this whole everyone pointing a gun at each other thing actually keeps these great powers from ever fighting a war with each other. They were both too afraid of how easy it would be for the other to strike back with their stealthy subs, ensuring the destruction of both sides. This is deterrence, and it is one of the major forces keeping great powers from going to war with each other. It's why the US has an entire fleet of subs with no other mission than to go into the ocean and just disappear, and just sit there, silently ready to make good on their threat that if you attack us, we are always ready to respond. Submarines are also really good for spying. Okay, so we know by now that
people ask me all the time, Kris, if you could...
I'm kind of curious about the spying aspect, because how capable are they of hearing? They have to intercept. I bet you, being so close to another country, you probably intercept their transmission somehow, right? I don't know.
Okay, so we know by now that a lot of communication in this world is made possible because of underwater cables. It's not just the internet. These cables have existed for a very long time. And they're just sitting there at the bottom of the ocean connecting the whole world. And they're safe because no one has access to them. No one's going to go to the very bottom of the ocean. Oh wait, submarines. Submarines have unique access to these cables. So it's the early 1970s, and American intelligence agencies team up with the Navy to have them scour the ocean floor looking for Russian communication cables, with the idea that they could tap into the cables and listen to them. And lo and behold, they found one. 120 meters below the surface, over in this eastern part of Russia, they found a cable that connected two Soviet naval bases. And they put a literal tape recorder into the cable, and now they are literally listening to Soviets talking to each other about all sorts of military things. None of it is encrypted in any way because no one expected them to dive down and find this cable. Oh, and they were really clever. They sort of only loosely attached it to the cable in case they needed to pull up the cable for maintenance or something. The little device would fall off and no one would ever know that they were being spied on. But the tapes that were recording filled up, so divers had to go down and retrieve the recording device and take out the tapes and put in new tapes, and they did that every month. And they were like, we will never get caught for this. But then eventually they did. It turns out that an NSA employee got paid $35,000 from the Soviets to tell them about this operation. Anyway, that would be an amazing movie. Someone please make that spy movie. The fact is that
Yeah, I want to watch that. Are you kidding me? Am I the only one who didn't know about this? That's crazy. Wow.
Still do a lot of spying. They will often have Navy SEALs aboard that are ready to dive and do ... redacted. We have no idea. We have literally no idea what they do, for obvious reasons. There is evidence that the US and UK spy agencies still tap into cables, like the undersea fiber optic cables that govern the internet, and that they do this all the time. See Edward Snowden's big leak and some deep dive into that. I'm not going to go into it, but we know that submarines spy. We know that countries are always spying on each other. This should not be surprising. In fact, during the research for this video, I felt the insatiable desire to dive down the rabbit hole of how submarines spy. And I didn't, because I'm trying to stay disciplined and I'm trying to tell this story, but leave a comment if you want me to make that video and I will consider it, because there is a lot more about that topic.
Yes.
Let's move on. Okay, so let's get up to speed. Where are we today with submarines? According to the US Navy's website, the US has 71 submarines. 53 of them are fast attack subs, and 14 are the ballistic missile subs that sit there and be our deterrent, and 4 are guided missile subs. But then there's other sources that say that there's only 68 submarines. I don't know. All of this is classified and we're not supposed to know, and no one's supposed to know, but we know a lot, but not specifics. And like I mentioned, all of these subs have very different capabilities. Fast attack subs, for example, are optimized for closer attacks. They use a lot of cruise missiles, which are launched through these big tubes and have jet engines and computer brains for navigation. They're way more precise, but they can still go pretty far. I mean, we're talking 2,400 kilometers away, 800 kilometers an hour. They're still very, very effective long-term weapons.
Russia says it launched 26 cruise missiles today.
59 Tomahawk cruise missiles have hit a Syrian airbase,
launching dozens of missiles targeting the Syrian regimes.
But again, the one that represents the mind-blowing reality of what we humans have invented is this sucker, the Ohio-class submarine. They do have torpedoes and several other sort of smaller scale weapons, but it's these tubes that are carrying missiles, which are carrying warheads, that are the big defining game changer of this technology. So let me just break down the journey of these rockets. They can hit targets that are upwards of 6,400 kilometers away. That's wider than the entire United States, and probably a lot longer, but of course the Navy won't tell us these things because it's all classified. And they don't just carry one nuclear warhead, they can carry multiple. And they're not all just going to one place, they actually get dropped at different locations. How? An unbelievable amount of scientific ingenuity. Let me explain. It starts at the boost phase, where the missile gets its initial oomph, gets pushed out of the water up into the air. Goes up into the sky, gets a bunch of momentum, and then the engines cut, and the missile just has momentum, and it starts to fly just using the laws of physics. It's literally at the edge of space. We're now in the mid-course phase. The missile then just starts casually looking at the stars to calibrate its position, and then making little micro adjustments to make sure that it is perfectly on course for its target. And this is where we need to talk about warheads. No, not those. These little cones that aren't that little are warheads, the most powerful weapons humans have ever created. These missiles can have up to 12 of these cone-shaped warheads. They're just hanging out on the front tip of this rocket. Eventually, this missile reaches its highest point and starts to come down. At this phase, the missile starts spitting out the warheads, just at the right time, just at the right velocity, and as they re-enter Earth's atmosphere, they start hurtling towards their targets, as far as 1,500 kilometers apart. So like roughly the distance between Iceland and Norway. And then, when they get where they were programmed to go, I mean, you know what happens.
Really?
Planning a family? Check your sperm count. You can test it in your room. Morning, night, or afternoon.
Oh, but that happens potentially 12 times from this one rocket. Each one of these explosions being roughly 6 times more powerful than the bombs dropped on Japan at the end of World War II. Okay, so that was one missile. This submarine can hold 24 missiles. Like, what have we created? Luckily, since World War II,
we created a deterrent. That's what they created.
No one has had to use nuclear weapons in any conflict. We've had a lot of threats lately, but luckily they just remain a deterrent force and not an actual thing that we use. Hopefully it stays that way. And yes, several countries have the ability to load these things onto their floating weapons called submarines that are lurking in the depths of the ocean at all times, spying and just sitting there. Okay, so that's submarines. Well, no, that's like a teaspoon of submarines. This topic could go on forever. I mean, seriously, this was a painful story to do because there was so much I had to leave on the table. I have a feeling that I'm going to be making a few more videos about submarines soon. But let's just remember what we've learned here. We humans have invented something pretty wild. Something that should be impossible. The ability for a bunch of us to live underwater in these floating buildings for months at a time. We load these things up with enough firepower to turn entire countries to dust, all in the name of never having to use them. That is the paradox of modern conflict. And yet, the thing I'm taking away from having spent a lot of time thinking about submarines is that humans can kind of do whatever they put their minds to. Making power out of nuclear fission and putting that into an underwater weapon? Like what? Shooting rockets into space? Having them look at the stars and then land wherever they want to? Humans did this. We did it because of fear and skepticism and conflict. We did this to get ahead, to be more powerful. But we did this. And that, in some weird way, gives me hope that someday, when the best minds aren't directed to the priorities of power and conflict, we humans will continue to make magic happen. Magic that helps more and more people live better lives, making impossible things possible.
Yeah. In a perfect world, we would take care of. In a perfect world, we wouldn't have nuclear war. We wouldn't have war. But we do, because we're human. And killing is in our DNA. So, I'm going to end this here. Yes, I am. All right. I know this wasn't as long as the last one, but he didn't make the video as long as I thought he'd make it, so it's your fault. And I'm going to protest right now by shutting my mic off. And how do you feel about that? Like and subscribe. Video out.